Well, my name is Don Carmichael. I was born in Los Angeles, California, 1925, 16 February. And from then on, it's been a rough road to hoe. What else would you like to know about me?
When did you join the Army?
Well, first time was 6 February 1943. And the Navy had turned me down before that, said that I physically it didn't look like I could make it or something. It's a funny story. I'll tell you later. I wasn't worried about the Army. They knew if I was breathing, I would be all right. And 6 February 1943, private, I can even give you my 19203442. That's my enlisted serial number.
What was your motivation for joining?
Well, there was a war on, and I'd been in military school. My mother had to do something with me. I come from a broken family and all that business. Never really had a father. I had a father, but they were passing through, so to speak. And I guess my motivation was a desire to serve, to join into something worthwhile. I was somewhat of a problem in high school. Had a lovely nickname that they remembered in a reunion. There's Rowdy Don. This was 25 years later. I wasn't a rowdy, but I wasn't a very good student, so anything was a plus from then on in. And I was a little disturbed that the Navy had turned me down, but I didn't lose any sleep over it. A friend of mine who had been in the Army for 3 months, they kicked him out because of asthma. He said, "Join me, we can be movie stars." I said, "What do you mean?" "They're looking for extras for See Here How Private Heart Roll." And we went out there at $17 a day and spent a week with them out there. You remember the movie? No. Robert Walker, long time ago. No, I was motivated to be in the Army, and I had served in a military school, was used to saluting and so forth. I remember a company commander screaming at me. I was a little bit late on a pass at basic training. And he had kind of a feminine voice that didn't wile us too much. And lo and behold, after he screamed at me, he says, "What is your excuse, soldier?" I said, "Sir, no excuse, sir." So I knew it was easy for me in a sense because I'd been, in a military school environment. Page Military Academy, big school for little boys. I mean, I was motivated, I think.
Is there a history in your family of military service?
Yeah, my father, I said, if I turned out it was not my real father, he adopted me, and I never knew my real father. Both of them gave me up early. Can you believe number one father, who gave birth to me with his mother, and I have that in my website story. One kept me for 3 months, and the other kept me for 4 months. So when the Carmichaels adopted me, it was in February, and they picked February 16th as my birthday. I guess it's true. And by then, I was a year old. This all happened to me right away, And so I, in a sense, grew up without a father. So I had to either put up or shut up. And I had my fun doing that along the way.
Where were you on December 7th, 19?
In high school, 11th grade.
What were your thoughts that day?
Well, I was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the event. This had to be something, and I suspect the powers to be were a little concerned that we were so surprised as we were. Thank the Lord, the carriers were out. So they only got the battleships, not Alabama, of course, because it wasn't ordained yet, which incidentally is my birthday, February 16th, 1942. I learned that by reading the plate over there.
So tell me again, if you would, where were you on December 7th?
Where was I December 7th?
Yeah, just repeat what you already said.
Just in a high school class, as I recall. I don't know why we would hear it. We'd hear it on radio, I guess, no television. So, anyway, that's about all I remember. It was overwhelming to all of us, and since I'd already taken a shot at the Navy, I said, well, maybe me this time, huh? I can help.
What was your first assignment in the Army?
Well, of course, at Fort MacArthur Reception Center, he said, anybody want to go airborne? And I hesitated. I didn't go. I went later when I was commissioned. But I didn't move then. I had a high school classmate. By the way, your last interviewee remembered him, Big Bob Smith, 506 Infantry, Easy Company, 101st Airborne. And it was a joy to meet that gentleman, and having learned all about this great company in Paris, 1946, when my classmate, Big Bob Smith, as he was called, the 101st, but Burr Smith, as we knew him, told me the story about what became the Band of Brothers. So I learned about all those names, and I asked Brad about this. Who was the guy that lost a leg in Bastogne? And he thought for a minute, and he said, Garnier, which was what I remember too.
You mentioned that you loved your unit commander and you received a letter. Would you please repeat that now that the plane has passed us?
Well, remember, it wasn't my unit commander. It was the fellow you just interviewed's commander, as well as Bob Smith, the one I talked to him about, and so forth. And he was a legend of his time. He died, I think he finally commanded a battalion, and I think he died a full colonel, and so forth. And
tell me about the letter.
As I recall, one letter that Burr wrote me was how to develop second lieutenants that they know to be responsible for what their people do or don't do. And that this is not a game. They need to be led by, and he cited his own company commander, Max Winters, I believe his name was. Brad remembered that name too, of course. I think he did well probably on his interview. My unit commander, I told you the only unit commander I had at that time was at basic training. I remember my unit commander, Bradley Davis, 113th Cavalry. That's after I landed in France on Omaha Beach, 44, in a replacement packet. But you didn't ask me all that, and that was the gap. We had transitory commanders, like at in Washington, in New York. We'd had only about a week there, and then we went. I got to England in May of '44, and I can't remember the unit commander there. So I didn't really have anyone that I had known anything. We were kind of transitional, for lack of a better term, and just me and my buddy. We got very close to people then. On the ship over, it was Chorwon and Carmichael. You can remember that because after we ate, it was a Navy ship. Guess where the hammocks were sung? Right above.
When were you assigned to the 113th?
When? Well, it was approximately 16, 17 July of 44. Remember, at that particular time, the cavalry had already been in one action. We were replacements, four of us, for the company that lost some people during that action. And at that time, they had the big bombing of St. Lo by B-17s, completely obliterating the Panzer-Lehr Division, which controls St. Lo. And we left that place probably about the 17th or 18th. I had some unfortunate accidents along the way. I ran into some Germans and so forth. Most memorable is the lessons we learned. When one tank was hit, the automatic thing the tank commander did be learned in training is go out the escape hatch. No, get out of there quickly, as one did. Saved everybody down below. Not for long, they all died. And that happened we went into St. Lo. Our lead tank got hit, killing a couple, and we learned another thing about don't wear a lot of gear. Like we tried to get the assistant driver out. The only one that was survived, we couldn't get him out. I wasn't in part of there. That was told us, and but the lesson that we learned was don't wear something that will hang up on the tank. So those lessons are learned. And I remember getting my first weapon. They said, throw that, what is that, a grease gun? That's what they called it. It's a substitute 45 caliber weapon. He said, we'll give you a real weapon. He gave me a Thompson submachine gun. I had to throw that in the floor and so on. I don't know if I answered that properly or not, but close enough, I think.
What can you tell us about the Battle of Normandy?
Well, I understand from reading quite a bit about it that there was about 50,000 people in contact with each other there over that period of time. And remember, the Germans had fought the British at Caen and other places. And we, of course, weren't asked for our opinion. We just joined our tank company, or tank troop as they call them, in the cavalry, 113th Cavalry, and so forth. And we didn't look at this perspective-wise. I say it was certainly a key battle in breaking out of there. They had done in part with the aviation and so forth. And the British had done well over there in taking Caen and so forth. So things were helpful that we suddenly moved out on some kind of a task force, ending up in Martagne. The Germans counterattacked. We lost our leader. He went over to supposedly check on where the rest of the platoon was. They found him over there in the hiding in a hole. I guess he was afraid he was going to get hurt. We weren't too impressed with him. I won't even mention his name. Platoon sergeant took over, and he was leaving with his section, 2 tanks to a section, his tank. And Gene Clark, the gunner on Porte's tank, had went over there to find him, and he said, and Smith told us, he was then in command, get out of here, follow us out. And we did, and we broke through the German lines. It wasn't really consolidated much and so forth, so it wasn't a bad deal. It was kind of scary for a while, but, we were learning and so forth.
So what was your role doing all of that?
Well, I was assistant driver, and I asked the big Dutchman that sat next to me. This was an Iowa National Guard unit. They had been together for a year when they were activated, been in England for some time, and he was from Iowa. The gunner had the I think he's either called Fatso or Fat Boy. I would think the tank commander, his name was Russian because of his name, Markowski. And he wasn't as tough and good as he could have been and so forth. He had his problems. And Chris Broquet was kind of like a father to all of us. He kind of helped me get squared away and so on. We had some action down there before we broke out of there and so forth. And ultimately, I went to the end with them. Ended up on the Elbe River. Magdeburg had already fallen, and we joined the Russians up there. Our sister squadron met them after relieving us, and so on. So it was kind of a exciting trip. We didn't have it as tough as the infantry, but we had our moments and so forth. And got back and ultimately got set up in Frankfurt.
What was the feeling when you met the Soviets?
Pardon me?
What was the feeling when you met the Soviets?
When the thing was over?
The Soviets
oh,
up at the Elbe.
Well, friendly, not overly. We weren't sure of them completely. And, what do I know? I'm just now a brand new tank commander with no tank. I was a buck sergeant without a tank, still a lieutenant's gunner. And he had just been injured and he was loved. So I had the tank and so forth. And it was kind of Fallout 1. We had some action when I finally got an M24 tank. And we opened up a camp, which was a tragedy, what it was. These people weren't the ones that they cremated. These are people that were perhaps waiting or something. And they were, what do you call it? A displaced person camp is what it was. We liberated. More exciting, we freed some British airborne. Remember the great airborne jumps that you just talked to 101st? Eindhoven, where he was, there was where Jim Gavin with the 82nd was, and the Guards Armored never reached Arnhem, where the British had jumped in. We saved or got them out of the prison camp there because they were right in that area. They were breaking out and so forth. And that was a real thrill and so forth. And quite a few were captured and quite a few were killed. Guards Armor never reached them in that market garden, so-called market garden operation up there.
What was next? Where did you go from the Elbe?
Say again?
Where did you go next?
Well, I went back to Frankfurt and set up in a German barracks, which was needed to be cleaned up and so forth. And we did all that. And soon, those of us didn't have enough points. I had about 70 points. I had a point schedule to get people to go home. Ultimately, we ended up sent up to the quartermaster outfit. And we stayed up there for a while. And believe it or not, were considered to go to Japan. That we had left the outfit before they came home as a unit, 85 points and more, and they filled up with those of us who left them. And we were scheduled, supposedly, that we would be heading to Japan. And we said, "You gotta be kidding, one more is enough." We were somewhat rebellious over that and so on, but so it went. And we finally left Germany and came home the end of 45, end of 44, first part of 45, 46, and so on. So.
And then you also saw combat in two more major conflicts.
Right. In Korea, I went over there in 52 as a second lieutenant. I had volunteered for that. my then wife said, "Hey, you got to be kidding. You've been in one war. What do you want to go back again?" I said, "Well, I have to be there because that's where the military is, and I'm a regular soldier and so on." And I joined the 65th Infantry, was part of the 3rd Division in its creation. 3rd Division joined in the Korean War later than some of the earlier units. You had the 7th Regiment in line. You had the 15th over here on the right, and in the middle was the 65th. We replaced the 30th Infantry, which remained at Fort Benning, Georgia. So we were with the Puerto Ricans, who had fought well up there, hit by the Chinese. I talked to my friends this morning about joining the outfit when I wanted to be in a rifle company, and they sent me to tank company, which theoretically saved my life because 2 of the boys with me, one died on Jackson Heights, which was the name of the hill that they'd fought well for, but it had since lost, and so forth. So we went on to fight well with the Cav throughout the rest of the Korean skirmish and so forth, and also the 65th Infantry, which is part of 3rd Division in Korea. I suddenly realized that when I landed at Normandy in World War II, that this was the real McCoy. I landed with a small packet. We called ourselves the Dirty 30. We stayed until we were assigned to units. I ultimately went to a cavalry regiment and fought with them through World War II. As far as the Korean War was concerned, I went over there in 1952. As you recall, the war started in 1950 with the North Koreans pushing the South Koreans pretty much south and so forth. We fought with the 65th over there periodically, and I ultimately took a tank platoon and a rifle company later on, and ultimately became the officer that I wanted to be, is down there in the rifle company so I could close with and kill or capture the enemy. The mission of the infantry, to close with, kill or capture the enemy. This is the story of the infantry, and I'd go on from there and so forth. We had our moments, served with a very fine commander up there, and we had our ups and downs. The Puerto Ricans did well with their proper leadership and so forth. They had their good moments and bad moments. In Vietnam, that was something I volunteered to go, and I went over there into a liaison group that worked with the Koreans. The purpose was to work with the regiments and provide their logistical support. So we provided the helicopters and other support activities. I served in the 26th Regiment, part of the Capitol Rock Division, which is their Praetorian Guard, and was later awarded an award there with them where I got a Bronze Star with a V, recognizing a couple of soldiers who had been wounded, and we got them out of the problem they were in and so forth. And they fought well, and I got something called the In Hun, which is for gallantry in action, given to me by the commander. I want to say Chung, but I could be wrong. Might be Chang. And they kidded me. They fed me all the interesting food that's hard to eat, and so forth. I ultimately became, on request, the deputy commander of something called Task Force South. Commanded a very fine soldier by the name of John R.D. Cleland. Fine soldier. He had jumped in the Korea and so forth, 187. And we had a swath of terrain. We had the Task Force South was formed up by a battalion of the 506th. You just spent enjoyable time with a member of the 506th, 101st Airborne. A battalion of the 506th was part of this organization, as was the 503rd, famous for operations in the Pacific. And the 23rd Arvin Division. We speculated that it was a transitional organization to lead us into Vietnamization that was coming up, turning it over to the Vietnamese and so on. But we had our areas. The boss had time to go take an R&R. Lo and behold, we got hit with a little car, but we handled it all right. Nothing that's too serious, and so forth. So we were still in combat. We had they had the waterway bunch down there. We were kind of in the middle, and then you had other units to our right and so on. Task Force South had a mission to hold and fight in this particular area. So we became part of the closeout in Vietnam, really.
Take me back to when you became platoon leader, and I believe that was in the Chorwon and Kumwha Valley conflict.
Yes. Well, when I went up to Chorwon, I'd already been selected to go up there. I had wanted to go up there, and the tank platoon company commander selected me to go up and join in the activities in 1952, probably about September, when they were having all the problems with the trying to take, which ultimately became Jackson Heights, right next to us. Chorwon Valley here, and so forth. We were part of that operation. And I became part and parcel of the 7th Cavalry battalion or regiment, commanded by Lloyd Wills, a very fine soldier that used me as his counterattacking force in the valley. And so I went up there and shot up the valley. I hope I got a few casualties on the other side and so forth. So I was quite active up there. And I told him, I said, someday I want to get to an infantry company. And Lloyd Wills told me, you come back to this regiment, I'll give you a rifle company. Don't worry about it. And I did, ultimately. When I went over there, he had already gone, but the fellow that took over from him remembered what he said, and I did get my rifle company. And I took over, kind of ironically. I also took his battalion. Joe Fix, the guy I took the company from, he went up to division. Joe went on to General Stars, too, a very fine soldier. And he turned over his battalion, 1st Battalion, 4th Infantry Division in Europe, and I took it over as a major and had it for about 2 months until I moved in a lieutenant colonel when I came home. So I had my activity, you might say. I was still involved.
So tell us a little bit about your transition from enlisted to officer.
Well, kind of like my transition from private to PFC. We lost all our tanks in our platoon. And Bert Jolly, our hero down in the first action, I was one of the replacements for. I told you the story, I think. And Bert and I both made PFC. That's for wonderful. I felt no great excitement, except I was a regular officer, and that was what I was trained to do. I'd already been through parachute school and so forth. I had combat in World War II, so I think I was prepared for it. And I ended up working with some very good people, Wills I mentioned, and so forth. And enjoyed my trip there. And when I went to Japan later on, I met my wife over there. After I'd served, I had points enough to go home. But I was requested by the division commander, believe it or not, Armistead Meade, who commanded the 1st Cavalry Division. Oh, he had a little help from Chuck Cadam, a friend of mine who was from the famous Cadam family. His father had landed at Omaha Beach with the 116th Regiment. I met him as a young lieutenant, major general. And old Chuck Cadam, I said, "What did you do? Did you help me get this job?" He says, "You'll never know." And anyway, I ended up there, and it was a thrill to be around those people for a while, but I didn't stay there long. I went back to the troops line and so forth.
How has being a part of the service impacted your life?
Well, I think the sense of discipline that I learned in Page Military Academy, at Page Military Academy, the big school for little boys. I went there at 12 years old or something. Was very helpful. So it was easy for me to make the transition. I told you about my funny company commander and all that stuff. And I ended up, as I said, going up to New York and all that stuff, and ended up going overseas as a lieutenant and so forth. And I enjoyed the trip, and I was looking forward to being part of the invasion. I wasn't really. It was D+10 when I landed. The big action had already started, but we had our share, and I had to learn very quickly what to do and so forth. And I had already served as a sergeant in the outfit, so it was easy to make the transition to lieutenant and so forth. And I did in the Korean War, where I landed as a lieutenant, soon to make captain over there, and so forth.
Looking back over those 27 years, what was the thing that you most are proud of?
Well, I guess you would have to say going through the schools, landing at Normandy and on the bad beach, but surviving that, which was not bad because the fighting had already been done there. But I think World War II gave me the sense of discipline and of growing up, because I was a high school malcontent, as I mentioned earlier, and so forth. I was proud to serve my country and grow up. I would say probably that was the best life's teacher, and so forth. And being a lieutenant was relatively simple after all what I'd been through and so forth. And so on.
You said you had a Navy story. You got a short Navy story?
Well, I can tell you why they turned me down. Is that okay?
You said you had it. You said you
yeah,
had a Navy story.
Well, I tried to join the Navy. This was right after I got out of high school, I was only 17. I guess I got permission from my mother or something. That was the only parent I had, and so on, alive. And anyway, I joined, I guess, not knowing really why, but I wanted to serve my country and so forth. And they had me really said, "Do you have trouble seeing?" I said, "Well, I've worn glasses since I was in the third or fourth grade. 2100 or whatever you want to call them. These are correctable to almost that, I guess, or they are better than that, and so on." And they talked about one leg being longer than the other, believe it or not, and my spine was showing. I said, "Well, I only weigh about 145 pounds. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know." I said, "I'm pretty healthy. I played some basketball. I play volleyball on the beach and so forth and so on. I'm not a physical wreck or anything." They weren't listening. They could care less, you know. Well, I guess the funniest war story was listening to that company commander scream at me. He had a effeminate voice. I told you the story. I was a little bit late on my pass. I deserved to be disciplined and so forth. I said, after he screamed at me and as to what was wrong with me, that I had broken rules and that I should be court-martialed, and I didn't cry on his shoulder or say no excuse. I had told him no excuse for my being late, sir, and he went on and on and on. I thought it was ridiculous, and I didn't say anything, of course. Been worse, I guess, and so on. I thought of that as ridiculous. I couldn't imagine this guy leading troops in combat. He was no Max Winters or that you just went through with a fine old soldier there. But
Thank you.
that tie is bothering everybody.
Yeah, it's the
You want me to
wind.
hold
It's
it?
the wind.